A great pleasure to be here, and I appreciate LCI Qatar invited me to join with the team today. So we've got a power-packed presentation today. This is a lead-in to our November 9th conference that Dr. Sebek has been putting together with lots of other participants. We'll have some of the most well-known people in the lean community from the States and around the world. We'll have Dr. Glenn Ballard, who is a founding member of the Lean Construction Institute in the United States and won the very first Pioneer Award with the late Greg Howell. We're going to have Dr. Tariq Abdul Hamid and a presentation from Michigan State. We'll have the guy who wrote the original IPD contract, known as the Integrated Form of Agreement, Will Lichtig. I'll be there as well, and we'll be bringing in a bunch of folks from Canada so that we can talk about how easy it is to migrate a form of agreement like the IPD from one country to another. So it's a great opportunity for us, and I want to thank Ashgal for helping us drive these better delivery models into Qatar. We're still hoping that we might be able to make that a live conference, but the way things are going in the world, it may be visual, so or virtual and visual, hopefully, both of those things. So today we're talking about barriers to entry, why we can't use integrated project delivery in Qatar. And so that's not an exclamatory sentence, that's a question, because I'm fully prepared to argue that we can use it in Qatar. And I think it's important for us to think about IPD as a stretch mode. But before we get too far into what it is and what it is not, I think we should set the baseline by giving us some information around why we may need it. So the agenda for today's workshop is why we need a collaborative approach. We'll talk about how construction is complex and it's complicated. Those are two different things, and it's chaotic. Our current practice actually, as Greg Howell used to say, represents a cohesive theory about how we deliver projects. It's coherent, even if it doesn't work very well. It does reflect our kind of countermeasures to trying to make things work, but as I made clear in my previous webinar with the Lean Construction blog on why lean, that we have come to a tipping point where, in fact, the paradigm has to shift because the system has too much pressure on it to actually deliver the value that we want it to deliver. And we'll talk about why it doesn't deliver value and what's up there. And then we'll talk about what's happening in the world, because in order to think about bringing a contract into Qatar, we need to see what has happened around the world. And by the time we get to our November conference, we will we'll have examples of contracts from Germany and France and other civil law jurisdictions that are different than the common law jurisdictions represented by the UK, the United States, Canada, and Australia. But there's lots of things happening in all of those countries as well. And there are opportunities for other kinds of contracts. But I think the one that most summarizes what we're trying to do, that gives us the most opportunity for better value delivery, is the IPD model. Some have suggested, including the Egan report from the UK in 1998, Reconsidering Construction, that actually you don't need a contract for a collaborative model, that if people would just collaborate, you'd be better off. And as we'll discuss, that is a great utopian vision, but in order for us to have consistency and reliability in the delivery of our projects and our understanding, it's really good to have a well-crafted contract that allows us to move forward with the things that we think add value to the process. And then we'll talk about what IPD is designed to do. We'll talk about the business model itself, about the pain share, gain share, about the collaboration that's inherent in the model, and how we manage it. And then we'll talk about how we have to use a lean operating system for management because the IPD contract is not self-managing. There's no system developed in the contract that says, here's how you're going to manage the project. So it creates a series of teams and one big team to deliver best value in construction and design through what's known as a relational contract. So it determines the relations between the parties, but it lets the parties then determine how they're going to design and implement the work. Then finally, what we need is an understanding of how we leverage all of the benefits that the IPD contract gives us. And by that time, we should be ready for questions. So construction is complicated and complex and chaotic. When we talk about complicated, we talk
I'm sorry, Dick, could you please share your screen?
Oh, yes, it's not being shared?
Not yet.
Okay, hang on. Hold, please. It says I'm sharing my screen. Okay, do you see this? Oh, you see nothing?
Not yet.
Okay, let me share. Let's share this over here.
We can only see your lovely face, Dick.
Can you see that? Okay, hang on. How's that?
I think it's coming. Yeah.
Yes.
You see 3 kids and a gray-haired old man?
Yes.
The most beautiful children in the world. Those are my kids. Okay, so let's move to share the presentation. So let's go back up to our agenda again, so you can kind of see it. If you've only been seeing my dulcet face there. So we're going to talk about why we need a collaborative approach. And the reason we need a collaborative approach is because construction is complicated and it's complex and it's chaotic. So you can see that the systems that we put together, the assemblies, are complicated. But we have 10 to 15 of those assemblies going on all at once in a very globular fashion. So it's almost like playing 4-dimensional chess. We have so many different things going on that makes it very complex. So it's hard for everybody to know everything that's happening. And because it's hard to know, it's typically very chaotic because our current management of contracts and of construction only looks at the current work that's being delivered, and we look at it in a very linear fashion. So we need a system that doesn't promote just a linear view of how we design and construct things, but something that understands the chaos and the complication and the complexion. So what does our current system look like? And is there value in the current system? So the owner comes up with the owner's business case, and the owner comes up with its budget, and it comes up with a contract completion date. Now the budget is usually based on some kind of benchmarking or some understanding of how much money the owner has to spend. And the contract completion date is usually aspirational. Because the project hasn't been designed yet, we really don't know how long it's going to take us. So the first thing that happens is we hire an architect, and the architect produces a series of documents called schematic drawings. And then once they have created a big pile of schematic drawings, then they give them to the owner for review, and they stand down for a few weeks. Then they move on to the next process once the SDs have been corrected, and they get into design development and the design drawings. And once again, this is a large batch of drawings that's delivered to the owner for review and approval before they move into how that design gets translated into construction. So whether these are issued for construction drawings or construction details or whatever you want to think of for CDs, that's the next process. And when the building has been designed and CDs have been created, with 100% of the program that the owner wants, we go to the street and we get bids from a number of people. So GC1, GC2, and GC3 all come into our vision and our contractual solicitation, and they send us bids. Now, typically, the low bid is higher than actually what we want to pay. So you can see that the low bid is above the line of what our budget is. And so we get into value engineering. And that value engineering means that we are paying what we thought we were going to pay for the entire program and only getting 75% of the program. Because value engineering almost always results in the loss of program as a way of getting back to the right budget. So once we've done that, we go back to the market and we solicit the same GCs, general contractors. They come in, they make a bid, and general contractor number 2 has won the bid. So we're lined up with general contractor number 2, and then they spend their time taking the contract and sending it out to the trades and trying to get the best price that the trades can give him. So because we have created a budget, a contract price, and because we have created a schedule, we have tried to sell the risk of completing that project at that price to the general contractor. The general contractor in turn sells the risk to the trades for each of their specific trade deliveries. So that means if a trade doesn't finish or finishes late or can't finish for that price, the risk of failure is on the trade. But in fact, the risk of failure is always on the owner, because if a trade goes down, then that has implications for everybody on the project. So what happens is we start wandering through the project, the trades find places where change orders need to be made because of the misalignment of contracts where everybody's out for themselves. The work doesn't get done in a flow sequence. And before we know it, we are not only over budget, but we're past time. So the big red circle there is what we're trying to deal with. How can we make that red circle be more efficient and more effective for everybody in the process? Because it's not what we expected. So the results of this process are pretty predictable. We know, and thanks to Todd Zabel, who is a smart guy who was one of the original founders of the Lean Construction Institute, little known fact, we have this whole concept of leaks happen at the intersection of contracts. Because each of these contractors is important to making the building waterproof and weatherproof, which is at baseline, the baseline requirement for a building, they're in no position to either collaborate with each other or cooperate with each other, because their contracts each carry substantial risk of failure if they don't deliver their scope. So the roofing contractor, the wall stud contractor, the caulking contractor, the window, the mason, the waterproofing guy, the concrete contractor, structural steel contractor, foundation and excavation, all participate in creating a watertight building, but they all do it at great odds to each other. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like I said, the results are predictable. Most capital projects, 49% of all capital projects are over budget, and 69% of new facilities are over budget. And what about schedule performance? The same dismal schedule performance, 44% behind schedule. And in new construction, almost 60%, so 6 out of 10 projects are behind the contractually negotiated schedule. So think about what that means. That means that people got together and they negotiated what they thought was the time it would take to build this building, but they didn't have really a fulsome idea of how long it was going to take, because what they did was make a prediction, and all predictions are forecasts. And as Dr. Glenn Ballard has reminded us, all forecasts are wrong, and they're more wrong the longer we look out ahead. So we haven't tried to get together as a team and figure out what's the right time to deliver that project and what's the right cost. Those things have been decided in a contractual vacuum, where some people are trying to win and some people will eventually be losers. So how well does that work? Well, one study showed that 32% of our work on project adds value. That means 68% is non-value add. And we know that we can calibrate at least 50% of what we do on projects as waste. 92% of owners are dissatisfied with architectural drawings. How crazy is that, right? 30% of everything that comes onto a project site is waste. So think of one of your buildings in Qatar, and you have 100 trucks that are dropping things off to the construction site. And right behind those 100 trucks are 37 more trucks that are taking the very stuff that was delivered away. What a wasteful opportunity that is. I don't know about Qatar. I would suspect that this is even higher, but 72% of the energy that we use in the US and in North America is used up in buildings. So that gives us a great opportunity to do things better. Most of you have seen this. This should be the flag of the Lean Construction Institute because it talks about construction productivity and how badly we are at being productive compared to other industries. So when people first saw this survey from Paul Techholz, they said, well, you're not counting this and you're not counting that. And you're not looking at Revit and you're not looking at technology and you're not looking at blah, blah, blah. So he said, okay, let me go back and I'll look at all the things that you have criticized. And we're actually doing worse than we were in 2004, because here was 2004 and look where we have sunk. So our productivity has gotten worse since we started focusing in on it. So that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So what are people in the world doing about this? Well, people in the world are taking a look at the issues that they have with construction, and they're finding out that most of the issues that they have with construction are because we lack a collaborative working operation. That means that the contracts between the various parties that build these things are not aligned so that they work together. They're actually working at cross purposes against each other. That better serves them than working together. In the UK, they have spent an awful lot of time thinking about these things. So Sir Michael Latham and the Latham Report was constructing the team. And before that, he had written a report called Trust and Money, which talked about the dysfunction between the price of things and their actual cost. Rethinking Construction was a report of the Construction Task Force that was spurred not only by how things were happening in the UK, but by disastrous overruns at the Scottish Parliament that have been documented by Ben Flyvberg, among others. Then Accelerating Change, which was also a strategic forum chaired by Sir John Egan, who talked about these things being as being as collaborative as they possibly could. And then another work by the Construction Excellence Organization said, never waste a good crisis. So the UK has been thinking about this for a long time. They've been leaders in world of construction. So we say from this, do we actually need a contract? Is the remedy for this a contract? Because as you remember this slide back here from Barry LePatner is a construction lawyer. And he says that the problem with all of our troubles in construction can be fixed with contracts. I'm not sure I agree with him, but the question is, do we even need a contract, or could we exercise collaborative behaviors in a way as Sir John Egan has said, if the relationship between a contractor and an employer is soundly based and the parties recognize their mutual interdependence, then formal contract documents should become obsolete. The Bureau of Standards in the UK has thought about this and has thought about whether we could actually get there. And in fact, their recommendation is, and the recommendation of most folks, is that we need a pretty robust, well-framed, collaborative contract that'd be beneficial for establishing a clear framework on which collaboration can be organized in a construction project. So in addition, most people in the world, including professors who think about contract theory and including actually the late Egyptian who was the general counsel for the World Bank, Ibrahim F.I. Sitara, all talk about the necessity for contracts that are essential between parties who operate in market economies that have a well-functioning legal system. So the most important thing is to have a contract, have it impartially enforced, if necessary, by a well-functioning legal system, and that allows markets to be developed and buildings to be constructed in those markets. So if we're going to have a contract, if we're going to have a contract, it was my Tennessee slipping in there, sorry about that. If we're going to have a contract, those contracts should be aligned. So what kind of contracts best align what we're trying to do? So the world has developed a number of different contracts. In Australia, back in the 1980s, they developed a contract called an alliancing contract that was used mostly in public projects and mostly for large infrastructure projects. And the idea of that contract was that rather than encouraging litigation, because that's what adversarial contracts do, why don't we just prevent people from suing each other in the contract and get them together in like one organization to build this process? And for Australia, that actually worked really well. So when the English and the folks in Great Britain started thinking about what are the kinds of things we can do because of the misalignment that we have in contracts and because of the adversarial nature of these contracts, they initially looked at an alliancing model, which they also called a partnering model. So right now, the major contract in the UK that is used, there's really two of them. One is called the Term Alliance contract that was drafted by the Association of Consultant Architects. And the second one is something called the NEC4 Alliance contract. So NEC4 is brand new in the last few years and replaced NEC3. And NEC means New Engineering Contract. And this comes from the UK Institution of Civil Engineers. And here's how they set it up. They set up an alliance board, which allocates the work, appoints the alliance manager. It makes decisions by unanimity and resolves disputes if there are disputes at the working level. The manager is the one that manages the alliance in accordance with the contract and their overall implementation plan. And the alliance delivery team are all the folks who are partners on delivering the work. So this alliancing thing works very much like an integrated form of agreement, but it is a little more formal and sets up more prescriptive processes for managing the alliance than the IPD contract does. So in North America, what's really been developed is the integrated project delivery model. And this was originally drafted, as I said, by Will Lichtig, who will be at our November conference, who is a lawyer in Sacramento and now is actually an executive vice president for the Bolt Company in delivering projects. And what Will intuited as a result of conversations at the Lean Construction Institute was, where could we use relational contracting to allow us to do the things that we're not doing right now? How can we create a contract that clears the space in our processes to allow us to be more collaborative and more cooperative? And from that original IFOA that he used at Sutter Health, and that I was fortunate enough to be part of the team at the California Prison Healthcare Receivership, run by Bill Proctor back in 2008, 2009, the integrated form of agreement was used on that project as well. And that has since morphed into a number of different contract models that share the same basic understanding, but they have some tweaks. Hanson-Bridget model is one that was written by Howard Ashcraft. He was responsible for the original AIA C-195, which was the American Institute of Architects in California drafted a contract called the 195, which was close to the Hanson and Bridget model. Howard has delivered that contract all over the world, and he's now an adjunct professor at Oxford at the Said Business School. And that the dean of the Said Business School is, for project management, is our good friend, Ben Flyvberg. So Howard has tremendous experience in this and has delved into this model extensively. Consensus Docs 300, designed and sold by the Associated General Contractors, and that's the AGC that awards the Lean CM that is going to be taught here next week, starting next week, to the Qatar LCI with a guy named, I think his name was Tony Jacobs, but you can clear that up. They have Consensus Docs 300, which is basically a checklist of a number of different options that you have in the IPD world, and you can include some clauses and exclude other clauses if you want to. The AAA has been, since 2008, promoting a number of collaborative contracts in their 195 series, but the A195 is their base contract. And recently in 2018, Canada, the Canadian Construction Document Committee, drafted a new CCDC contract called CCDC 30. And I've had the great honor of being able to implement the very first one of the CCDs with the chair of that committee, a guy named Gesa Bonfi. And I've convinced Gesa to join us in November for our contracting workshop here as well. So how does the CCDC 30 differ from these other models? Well, it's a little simpler. It's a little more straightforward. The key in all of these contracts are the supplemental conditions, how you amend the contract to conform to what you're looking for. So let's talk about the North American model of the integrated project delivery, because this is probably the one, if we were going to advocate what Qatar should use if they want to use this more collaborative approach. And let me stop right here for a second. We talk about collaboration, and we talk about a collaborative model, and we talk about relational contracting, and we talk about cooperation. Collaboration is a very specific skill set, and not everyone can collaborate with everyone else. As a matter of fact, if you have a room of 300 people, it's very hard to do a collaboration. And typically a collaboration on an IPD project is around systems design and systems implementation and level of quality and what goes where. And you can't have the entire big room of 300 people or whatever actually spending their time all collaborating around one issue. So you have to think about the teams that we put together under this model as cooperative teamwork teams, teamwork focused teams and project focused teams, and that we reserve collaboration for the people who have the knowledge and the wherewithal to collaborate around an issue. And it's important to remember that. But basically what happens with the IPD contract is that there is a period of time when programming starts. The owner has an idea what they want. The owner brings together the team, and the team begins to do a validation exercise to say, can we afford all of the things in the program that you have put into the program? Do we have enough money to do that? And during this validation period, it's really important to be thinking about not only our traditional benchmarking and estimating. It's really hard to estimate these because there's no design at that point in time. So it's important that we be thinking about what is the amount of money we have to set aside to be able to give the owner the greatest share of the program that the owner is looking for. Because in the lean world, we think about customer value, and value is defined by the customer, not necessarily by those of us who are part of the contract. So throughout the validation period, we figure out how much money it should cost us to build this building. And that's called the expected cost. So if we went to the market and we hired a general contractor and a design firm and all the consultants and all the trades, what would we expect to pay for this building under the existing system, assuming that everybody was an honorable participant in that system? And then we believe that there is so much room in the design and construction community to remove waste and inefficiency that we set a target cost below the expected cost. So what we're asking the team to do is to commit to delivering the project at the target cost. And we're actually asking them to make a commitment not to risk their company, but to risk their profit. So the validation period becomes extraordinarily important because it's the time during which the trade partners and the GC and the design partners all come to the conclusion about what they can commit to of, oh yeah, we can build this for that target cost. And we'll show you how the funding of those different buckets works as we go through time. So inherently, the program that's demanded by the owner or that the owner created the team to employ or to deploy is everything that the owner needs for this building to serve its purpose and generate the agreed upon value proposition. So how do we know what the value proposition is? So this is really interesting. This is one of the things I love about my career is that my partner, Dan Fauché, and I were the partnering consultants on the California Prison Healthcare Receivership Program. And the IPD or the IFOA at that time anticipated that 300 people would be ascending on Sacramento in June of 2008, representing 3 teams whose sole purpose was to design healthcare for the overcrowded California prison system. So the original concept was to design 7 different facilities to deliver healthcare inside the prison system. And these teams were coming to participate in that. So they were going to design it, and then they were going to build these 7 facilities. And the team that had the best design, the best attitude, overall scored the best with folks on the project, they would get the first fastest project. So the first project released would go to them. The next team that was the second best team would get the second project, and the third best team would get the third project. So everybody was guaranteed work if they, in fact, displayed the kind of collaboration and cooperation that we needed. But they also had to create these prototypes that carried the base scope. They carried everything that the owner needed for the building to serve its purpose and generate its agreed upon value. So when all 300 of these people showed up, the problem that I had was understanding what was value, because we talk in the lean community about the value to the customer. So we created a week-long workshop where we created values for what this building was. And we came up with like 6 values. So healthcare outcomes was one value, better healthcare outcomes. Staff safety was one because it was inside of a prison. We had a number of different values. And I've continued that practice in my delivery of IPD projects, where we come up with the 4 or 5 big values that this building is supposed to achieve. And that is in opposition to, or in conjunction in some cases, with creating conditions of satisfaction, which tend to carry both scope and aspirations and all kinds of owner requirements and different things, which I think kind of clouds the water for us. But the most important thing to decide upon up front is the base scope, and then we can determine whether we have enough money to build that base scope. So the expected cost is really a process of taking various benchmarks from the community that you're in, or the country that you're in, the region that you're in, and develop an expected cost from what should this cost us if we go to market. And it's interesting in these IPD projects, most people rely on the CM or the construction manager or the general contractor to use estimating protocols to try to come up with what that expected cost is. And this has been a real challenge for us for several reasons. The most important of which is that those estimating processes normally require takeoffs from existing plans. And in the IPD project, we have the CM on board and the trades on board before the project is designed, because we want to design how we're going to build it as we design it. So I've found that estimation is usually very conservative, and as a consequence, makes people really afraid that we won't be able to hit the target cost, because the estimated cost is substantial. So be wary about that we are trying to price a building without doing significant design, because we want the trades and the contractor to participate in the design of the building in terms of how we're going to build that building. So the expected cost that we set, and then we set a target cost below that. And this is, as we say, a stretch goal. And it includes the pre-negotiated profit of all the parties to the IPD contract. So one of the issues I had with the CCDC 30 in Canada was they keep the profit pool outside of that target cost, because if the target cost is exceeded, then it starts eating into the profit pool. But I think it's important to understand that you're not going to be able to build a building and have a target cost without paying people a profit. So it's important that we consider how that comes together. So in my mind, here's how we've put this together. The basic business model. We created an expected cost, and then the team profit is inside of that. Okay, and then from there, we go to what we think of should be the target cost. And that, as you can see, is below the expected cost. So that target cost has to include all of the team profit, and it has to include a contingency. So the thing I don't have in here is the contingency. And the CCDC 30, we actually created two contingencies, one the kind of project contingency, and then one called excess contingency, to make sure that everybody understood that contingency did not belong to the GC, it belonged to the team, and it was a profit distribution pool from the get-go. So the target cost pays off all the team profit, everybody's doing great. Now, if the actual cost with all of the team profit is actually less than the target cost, then the concept of shared savings kicks in. So if you take the ordinary contingency and we save a lot of money from what we thought we were going to spend, then we have shared savings, and the parties determine how they're going to distribute those shared savings. Typically, half of the savings go to the team and half of the savings go to the owner for reinvestment in wish list items. The converse of that is if the actual cost is above that, then profit is reduced, because the first line of defense to pay for actual costs in excess of the target cost is the profit pool. What Howard calls the incentive compensation layer, what some people call shared savings. Everybody has a different term for it, but that's what it is. Now, when the actual cost exceeds not only the target cost, but the expected cost, it eats all the profit. So what happens to the trade partners and the team members other than the owner? Well, the team members other than the owner have all been paid time and materials plus their overhead. That's a negotiated thing at the beginning of the contract to figure out how we keep everybody in business. We want to make sure that they don't go out of business, so we pay them profit and their overhead. And it usually takes some time at the beginning of a contract to negotiate what that overhead might be. But we pay them time and materials and overhead. And if everything goes wrong, then the profit gets eaten, and then the owner is responsible for the blue costs above the red line there. Thank goodness for the delivery of IPD projects. That's happened in the U.S. With over, I think, 1,000 projects that LCI has tracked. It's happened 2 or 3 times. So it's a very rare experience, and it usually happens because we have lost sight of the project somewhere along the line. And that's because we haven't effectively used an operating system that gets us to ground zero. So what's the problem that we're trying to solve? Well, the first problem that we're trying to solve is that misalignment of contracts because people work in silos. And I think that's evident to most people who work on big construction projects. So what we try to do is integrate the team. We work together and we share the same pool of money so that overall we're reducing the direct cost and the fee to a direct cost and a fee that's more affordable for the owner. We're also managing risk collaboratively. So on most projects, there are at the beginning, there are things that we know and there's things that we don't know. And risk is just what we don't know, right? So the predictable result of not knowing something is that we make a bunch of assumptions and we make a bunch of predictions. And we also know that our assumptions and our predictions don't work very well. On a traditional contract, we hire the trades around this point in time, and we don't know even what we're building fully until we're almost done. So our learning curve is very steep, and no wonder that we stumble along the way. So wouldn't it be cool if we could front load our understanding so that by the time we were through our concept, everybody on the team had a pretty good understanding of what we were trying to do on the project. So what would the effect on our risk management be? Well, we would move the known much further to the right, and that limits our risks. And one part of our risk mitigation strategy would be to buy insurance, because that's what we normally do. There's a whole industry that works on trying to figure out what risk is and how we mitigate it. And then we have a very small amount of risk that needs to be managed by the core group. So we have substantially reduced our risk. That's one of the reasons that we do IPD, is because we as a team are actively managing the risk. Now remember, this is the risk of all of this money that's paid into the middle of the table. So once we decide on the target cost, these chips, that $180 million or that $250 million or whatever that amount happens to be that's paid into the middle of the table, is then managed under the IPD contract by the project management team. So all of the partners and everyone else manage that money in the middle of the table. So it's in their best interest not to spend that money, because any money that remains in there are shared savings that they get a piece of. So I hope that's clear. The other thing that we're trying to do in terms of managing risk collaboratively, and this was something that I came to early on in my career as a trial lawyer doing construction projects, litigation back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, was that I always wondered why we had to make predictions about things when it seemed so obvious to me that there were things that we could know. Like we can know how long it takes to put in a certain duct run if we just ask the sheet metal guy. And I was a sheet metal apprentice, so I know exactly how long it takes to put in a number of lineal feet of duct in a straight line and then around a corner and then turning left and going upstairs, all kinds of things. So why wouldn't we ask people about that and remove our assumptions? And part of it is because we come into these projects with a lot of confidence. So here's superintendent confidence at the beginning of a job. This was an informal survey that Greg Howell did years ago. And we all miss Greg tremendously. We should never forget what a great pioneer he was in our project. But Greg loved nothing more than stories, and nothing more than stories than swapping stories with superintendents. So he spent a lot of time in trailers talking to guys and gals who actually delivered projects. So he found out that at the beginning of the job, this is the confidence level of the superintendent. And yet 3 months into the job, when they knew about it, they began to get really worried because their confidence level had dropped substantially. And part of that was because the assumptions that they had made up here had not paid out. So I found a couple of great quotes from some of our friends out there in the industry. Ove Arup, who designed the Sydney Opera House, was very early in 1970 thinking about the idea of total architecture as the perfect union of design and construction. You know, we have this idea that architects and designers should not participate in means and methods, and everybody agrees that that's just crazy. Then Ted Happold, Burrow Happold. So these are two of the great engineering firms in the world. Ted used to say engineering takes scientific and traditional knowledge of the physical and human environment, together with an understanding of construction methods and the market to join clients, architects, contractors, and others in providing solutions to problems. It's about economy and value. If you don't work together, you can't possibly get there. And And as he pointed out, if we don't work together, well, if we don't understand which we each do best, if we don't have a common language and values, we're in trouble. So all of this leads us to an operating system that is required under the IPD contract that frees us up to do whatever we want to, but we have to have a disciplined system for actually delivering the project. So I think it's important to understand that the lean operating system has several items to it. One is that we're all in the big room at the same time. The second is that we're planning with commitments. The third is that we collaborate. We really collaborate with each other. The fourth is that this is not kumbaya. This is about accountability. Everyone on the team is accountable to everybody else because everyone on the team is spending everybody else's money. And it's very clear that right off the bat, we're responsible. And that leads us to our understanding of one project and one team. So how do we develop a team mindset with a single project vision? Well, as much as I like layered understandings and not spending much time thinking about linear things, this is truly linear from my standpoint. So the first is transparency and visibility. You can see on the lower left that we have to be completely transparent. We have to be completely visible. So when we look at this big room, you can see that there aren't motivational posters on the wall. There's not like a big American eagle. There's nobody rowing a boat in unison. We are talking about visible. The entire project is visible on that wall. And transparency is your obligation not to have a hidden agenda. And if you're transparent and visible and the project terms are visible, then we can collaborate together. If you have a hidden agenda, there's no way I can collaborate with you. So it immediately goes back to transparency and visibility. Well, once we start collaborating and you say you're going to do something and you actually do it, I say I'm going to do something and I actually do it, we begin to build trust from that collaboration. And that trust is what allows us to make commitments. We talk about projects as a network of commitments, but we can't make a commitment unless you trust that all of the work that's necessary for you to keep your commitment will be done, because you trust that the other people will in fact create and maintain those commitments. And commitments made, commitments kept, that leads to achievement. And all of these things, this purple arrow really ought to be under all of these. All of these lead to knowledge. Just think how much data we create on projects that goes unused. How many of you in your construction practice have gone back and trued up estimates? So if I made an estimate, I'm going to go back and true it up and see what did it actually cost and how close did I get and how is that going to affect my estimating capacity? Well, hardly anybody ever does that because the information is not necessarily available to them. The trades don't share information about how much things cost or how much work they put on a project. That's left for us to find out. So you can see that the IPD model actually enhances that. What else do we need? Well, we need the visibility, the collaboration, the trust, the commitment, the achievement. So what does that mean for us, though? Well, it makes our work better. That's our goal. Our goal is not to hold hands and sing songs. It's to make work better. We should always focus on work that releases work, not on sing-songy work. Quintessential to the understanding of LCI everywhere, including LCI Qatar, is never have work waiting for workers or workers waiting for work. And of course, we want to make work safer. And I think we should be adding to this, something that I've seen on every project I have done in the last 20 years, is we are now all concerned about sustainability, and rightfully so. So we want to make our buildings more sustainable. We want to make them work better, and we want to do that value proposition. So there is a system behind all of this. And this is something that I drafted up for the Center Block project for rehabilitating the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, which is the capital of Canada. And if you don't think about things as a system, you are going to be doomed to having to work with a system that doesn't really work for you. So the lean operating system works through all of these different machinations. And I'll show you kind of the 9 steps of of what we do. The first is we start the project off. We're determining our team resources, and we're figuring out who's going to do what and what's going to happen. The second is that we have a project kickoff, and that's where we develop the values matrix. We also develop a matrix regarding who's going to do what work, and we develop a teaching book or a teaching method that allows us to set baselines for the program design, delivery, and implementation. It allows us to understand risks as unknown assumptions, and it allows us to deliver a project plan around necessary deliverables and milestones. The third part of the plan is our pre-planning and prep for target value design, which means that we're acquiring all the necessary information to make TVD productive. We are beginning to understand the basic cost, the risk, and time issues that we have, along with identifying the right kind of quality. I mean, people talk about under-promising and over-delivering. I think that's just as bad as over-promising and under-delivering, because we're trying to deliver to a specified quality level. We never want to over-deliver. We want to deliver just in time, the right thing that's been asked for that gets us to the value proposition. And then we march through target value design, which actually is a pretty complicated process that is based on set-based design and creates a whole number of options, creates an optioneering process for eliminating some of those options, creates a choosing by advantages process to make sure that we're making the right decisions about things that we're moving forward with. And it allows us and frees us up to create our plan for making sure that we're designing and building this project in the best way possible. So we're developing those set-based options, and we're making real-time budgeting, scheduling, and risk decisions. And here we have set out, this is the part where planning, every day we plan saves us 4 days in construction. So it's really important that we spend enough time here and do all the things that we think about. Section 6 is, let's get going on this thing. Let's validate it, let's coordinate it, and let's monitor it. So we validate it through our validation process, and then we begin to coordinate and monitor things. We're constantly looking at things. We're not waiting till the end of the month to look at things, though. We're looking at things in real time. That's the beauty of stickies on the wall, is that we're looking at things in real time, and we're fixing them as issues arise. And then construction and implementation is really the whole series of beneficial and effective steps that we take to increase our overall productivity and reliability. So everybody knows about the last planner system of production control. That is the system that we use with stickies on the wall to make sure that work is made ready to be installed, that only the work that's actually ready is planned to be installed. We shield the system from work that can't be installed. And we move through a reliable delivery system. So the last planner is really not about productivity as much as it is about reliability. Productivity is more about tact time and all of the things that you can do when you have mastered predictability. But first you have to master predictability before you can increase your productivity. And one of the games I wanted to play with it at our conference, if we could do it live, is called the Make a Card game. And the Make a Card game makes it absolutely clear that planning the work and allowing the workers to plan the work, the people who are going to do the work, increases our productivity, but it doesn't increase. One of the things that you do in that game is you take little dots off of a piece of paper. You get those dots from Staples that have 48 in a row. You take that dot off and you put it onto a card. Like work so in the first round, people do like 6 cards. You have 3 rounds of 6 minutes. The work that you do in the first round, only 6 cards, increases to 60 or 70 cards in the third round. It's the same time, it's the same materials, it's the same work. So we never make the work go faster. What we do is we eliminate the space between the work. And that's what's really important about construction implementation in terms of how we get more productive and more reliable in what we're doing. Then the final one of these things is lessons learned in team alignment. So we're constantly going back to revisit what we learned. So this is the operating system that we try to use, that the IPD agreement allows us to use. So if we move into doing IPD agreements in Qatar, it'll be a new way of looking at old problems. And it'll allow us to do project closeout and occupancy in a really great way. We have a team environment instead of a siloed environment. We have processes that actually work. We move from a CPM kind of schedule to a collaborative schedule that's developed by the people who do the work. And I can tell you that almost every project that I've been on using integrated planning and scheduling has recognized 20% or more in labor savings. So currently we try to sell risk to people. We try to base costs on assumptions that we don't really know. Compensation's is really based on who's best at making guesses in our negotiation. So why wouldn't we try to be more sensible about this? Identify risk, monitor and manage it together. We develop costs based on actual work that needs to be done. Rewards are based on fair negotiations and not a lump sum, no-win negotiation. So typically communication is very vertical and maintained within silos on our current projects. And we do heavy documentation, not only to document claims, but we also do large batches of things that don't make a lot of sense. In the lean world, communication is direct, immediate, and it's enhanced by technology. And we look at only the documentation that's needed to advance the work. And our documents focus on the release of work. Traditional project delivery is very heavy on reporting. Well, we don't need reports if everybody is aware of what's actually being produced, and if we archive through A3s and other processes that we have. So that's the barriers and the impediments to bringing IPD to Qatar are not that substantial. But it does mean that we have to think differently about what we do. So let me just play this little, let me see if we can make this thing happen. Play this little video about changed attitudes and changing people's minds.
Dick, could you please redo it? When you share, click the little check box at the bottom to share the audio.
Oh. So you can't hear the audio?
No, when you press share screen, when you share the screen, you will see a little checkbox on the left lower corner. You have to click it in order to send.
Okay, got it. Perfect. Okay, let's start this again. How's that? Can you hear that now?
Perfect.
Whoa, that's not good.
Oh, I don't need this. I'm already late.
Somebody will come. Anybody out there?
Do you have a phone?
No. Sorry. Somebody! Hello? There are two people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something? Help! I don't believe this. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm gonna cry.
Well, it's not enough left to do. That's it.
Hello? Hey, don't worry about it. I'll fix it in a second.
He said he can fix it. All right. All right, that's more like it. He says he can fix it.
Okay. So that video is very instructive in terms of, are we hopeless victims of fate, or are we able to just walk up or down the escalator? It's really as easy as that, I think, to bring IPD and the promises of more collaborative delivery to Qatar. Is just rethinking what we think about our best practices and start following the rest of the world in developing more of these collaborative processes.